Again, you're in a space where, as I hope I've made super clear in all these classes, the more accurate you are in the early stages of measuring and cutting and sewing an accurate quarter seam, the more things will fit together just as you expect. But it's not the end of the world. It just isn't. It's, you know, if it doesn't go quite as you thought you were going to get, then change the plan and make it work. As in most quilt designs, there's sort of a structured traditional method and plan, and there's more of the free improv kind of thing. And so I've included pictures in the handout from Pinterest, credit them, and there is, I've given you guys here in the class, I've given a template for the Dresden plate. Sometimes it's called a blade, sometimes it's called a pedal. It was a hard copy, so I don't quite know how to make that be on the
those
thing.
Online. There's a link in the chat right now. You can click on that and have it open in another tab so you can
So I,
to it as
right.
Suzanne's talking about it.
Right. So let me first just kind of review the physics of a wedge. So a wedge is simply something that tapers on one end. That's all it is. Now, if you look at a wedge as a single plane that goes from skinny to large, it's basically in physics a lever. So, or an inclined plane or something like that, so that it joins two things. In art, a wedge or an angle like that draws your eye. It adds interest. So if you use wedges, if you use the Dresden plate design, in their mixed up way, they add a lot of interest. So this is just sewn together in a similar way as you would do a piano key border. So in a piano key border, you have strips of straight parallel lines, and you're sewing them together. They may or may not be the same width in a piano key, but in this, you have every piece is wider at one end, tapered at the other. And what that means is you can't use, well, you could, you use a 45 or 40-inch width of fabric, but because you have a taper, your one end would be really wide and your other end would be really skinny. And so if when you make a piano key, you have straight parallel lines and you're sewing a width of fabric and then you chop it up into sections so it's super efficient. With this, with wedges, you kind of need to cut them into shorter pieces because as they taper, you're going to have a chunk out here that's, 4, 5, 6 inches wide, and down here you'll have little skinny ones, and vice versa on the next one. So, so shorter pieces, I just set my short pieces down and take my ruler and cut at an angle. Wider at one end, narrower at the other. And then I start sewing pairs together, and then I start sewing those pairs to other pairs. So when you put pairs together, you want to make sure that you are consistent in where you start on, say, this seam, where you start. I have my wide one on top of my skinny one. And that I do all my pairs that way, because then when I sew the pairs together, they'll go together right. Otherwise, I'll have two wides next to each other and I can't flip them and get them to work. So this is basically what you end up with. I gotta get this extended here. And then, now on a piano key border or section, you are using the seams to look through your ruler and line them up straight. On a wedge, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to make sure you get all the ends in there. So, whack, those come off. Now some of those pieces might be usable later. Now I want to see how wide I can go, and I'm gonna line my straight line up with my cut line, and there you go. There's that. So now I have a nice even piece. So this might be a block in itself. It might be the border. It might be added to other stuff, whatever. Might be cut up again. And so there's a lot of ways to use wedges to give your eye that movement. So you can combine wedges with squares and straight and perpendicular lines, parallel lines. You can have just wedges in your quilt. Now, if you look at this, I just bought this in McCall, Idaho from Granny's Attic, their lovely quilt shop. And if you look at this pattern, this is all strips. Now, what if this was wedged? What if the long pieces were wedged? It would add a whole nother level of interest to things, but it wouldn't be as fast, that's for sure. So, so just something to think about. And if you went into a more modern improv state, even these strips here could be tapered. And so you could have something going on there that adds interest. So, when you make a block, let's say a 9 patch, this is a class I'm going to be teaching for Missoula Quilters Guild coming up here. But if you were to make a 9 patch block and then say this whole square was out here and it was all perpendicular, and then trim it off to make it wonky, you now have a wedge. Well, this block is actually made with the wedges cut ahead of time. So you start with one square in the center. This pattern is called Wanda. And then you sew, if you're doing it scrappy, you just sew a pile of fabric 2 squares together. You set it down on your cutting mat, and this is one of the times I don't usually use my cutting mat for my guide because I want to be in tune to what's inside my quilt. And you cut 1/2 inch in from the bottom end and the top end in the left-right opposite diagonal. And bonk. And then you have, oops, I'm stepping, all of these pieces. And then you do what's called a partial seam. I think we've talked about that at some point, but what you do is you sew, you find that right angle corner and you start on any corner of your center square and you sew down here, leaving about 1 inch, 1.5 inches open. And then that opens up, and then you take another pair. I gotta find the right one here. And you sew that on. But now your second seam is gonna go all the way across that first piece you sewed on, so that's complete. Then you open that up and you sew another one across there, another one across there, and then you go back and finish that first seam all the way out. So that's what a partial seam is. And this is a really fun pattern. I've made a couple of them already, and in this last month. And you can have the center block be a feature fabric like I've done here, or you can do, or you can make it all scrappy, or you can do kind of a checkerboardy thing and have 1/2 of them light and 1/2 of them dark. There are a couple tricks to cutting. 1/2 of your pairs of 2 square sets, you cut top left to bottom right, and 1/2 of them you cut top right to bottom left. So then you get everything spinning. So you end up with these blocks,
Now, is that square? 'Cause
It is
it's an
square.
optical
It
illusion.
does not look it, does it? They're
No.
9 3/4 is what mine came out to be. But because you do half of the blocks tilted one way and half of them the other, you end up with this zink zonk, you know, kind of thing. So it adds movement. So when you get these wedges, then you start taking the eye in these different directions. So that's the fun of wedges. When you start to think wedges and you think, oh, that looks like a real chaotic mess. I could never do that. This is super easy, super easy. I don't do much that isn't. So, so there's that. This is, I think I've brought this one in before. This is called a puzzle quilt. And if you look at this one, you'll see that every piece pretty much is a wedge of some sort. And so things have a narrower and a wider end, an edge. And that's what makes this move. That's what makes this such a dynamic quilt. This was in my early days with a, oh, that goes, and boy, did I get a big palette. And I'm like, okay, maybe I should have narrowed it down a little bit. But we all learn. Or we don't. So a triangle is basically a wedge. A diamond is basically a wedge. We've had classes on that already. But a diamond has the narrow to wide and then back again. But where you have that mountain, you have the eye traveling. So knowing just how a wedge works can give you more creativity in your design work. If you look at a quilt design and think, oh, I could do that, but it's kind of boring, think, cut it at an angle. Think, change it up like this Wanda design. So then you start getting circles. Now the other thing that wedges do is they create stability, because a Dresden plate takes all the wedges and puts them in a nice circle with a center in the middle, and you just go, ah, I'm here, I have arrived. And so Dresden plate is really quite a beautiful block, and of course it is. It's lasted forever in the records of quilt making. But these are a little bit more modern. You have a lot of tools that you can use in wedge making. This tool is, and I know Confidence Stitch has them. Sorry I didn't get here early enough to take a look and see what all your selection is. But this one is specific to this pattern. Sometimes you buy a pattern and you get a tool. Sometimes you buy the pattern and you get home and go, oh, I should have got that tool. It's nice to use these, but I want to remind you that your rulers have angles. They have 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 60 degrees on them. And so you may very well be able to just use your straight ruler. So if you look at this, let's see if we can find it. It would appear not. Not to fit in anything. So this is a good tool to have. But the one I'm going to use today for the Dresden plate table topper and demonstrate, it is actually the 60 degree line and the 30 degree line. That's the width, and you can make it as long a blade and narrow in the center, connected in the center for that matter, right to the tip. And you can come out as wide as you want. Guess what's coming up? The holidays, and a lot of people like a Christmas tree skirt. Throw a bunch of these together, you've got a beautiful Christmas tree skirt. So if you were to cut a really, if you wanted to make a bigger piece than what I'm going to demonstrate today, and you take this on your fabric and you take your ruler and you just set it on the line of the paper and you extend it out. That's all you're doing, and then you extend this side out. And then, so that blade together. So your blade is going to be pretty wide at the end, the more size you want. And this is a 12 blade Dresden plate design, the one I'm going to demonstrate. And that's what this pattern I've included will do. But there are a lot out there that are much smaller. This is one. This is smaller. And some of them, as you can see in a picture down here under the improv title, each blade is stripped. So what's done is somebody stripped in fast fashion strips of fabric, because they're parallel, and then set the blade this way and then cut another blade the opposite way. So you're using, it's very efficient in using all of your fabric. So these two pictures at the bottom have those, and if you're looking at it on a computer, of course, you can enlarge it. And that's really fun to play with. So then you get your strips, maybe Christmas fabrics, maybe in my house we celebrate winter and skiing and winter stuff. And so I have a tremendous, lovely collection of snowflake fabric. And I've made a number of Christmas tree skirts that have snowflakes on them. And that's lots of fun. And if you think about it, a snowflake is a 6-pointed object. So it's basically a Dresden plate, a wedge. So there you go. I love wedges. This is fun. I'm going to show you this picture first. This is just a pattern that you could get, Ginger Jar Timeless Treasures. It has the use of the Dresden plate or the wheel. Sometimes you'll see patterns that reference like Chinese coin. I've done one that was called a Chinese coin for my brother, and so you don't have to have the whole quilt if you're feeling intimidated by the circular setup. You can do just a few blocks to give it that movement. This one I made for my very dear friend Jackie, who taught me how to do the Dresden plate I'm going to demonstrate. So kudos to Jackie. She's an amazing quilter. And this I made for her when she got a job, a new job, and I thought, you know, she's going to be working with a lot of folks that don't get quilting, that she's a scientist. And I thought, I'm going to make her quilt for her office. So I made this one. I know she loves blues. And she said, if you're allergic to cats, don't come near it. Her cat has this one staked out now. She's retired and it's at home. And then I threw a little fun in it because being in the science world, a lot of men are working with you, and so they may not know what's on the back. And I know it's really quite lovely, cowboys in the back. And I said, so if you ever just need a little, break, take a peek at the back and see what it does for you. But anyway, so these are the blades. This is a curved seam, but it doesn't have to be. It could be appliqued on. So you can top stitch that edge after you press it under, or even raw edge. There are a lot of ways that you can make this block more refined, more complete, and easier. So depends on what you're looking for. And then to mix these with the squares, to me, I just love mixtures. I really do. I like that combination of curves and angles and squares. And sexy men. Of course, nowadays that's like so tame.
Totally different impression of you now.
Oh, fun. Here's another wedge. This is pickle dish. This pickle dish is so easy. Oh my gosh. So you have the background fabric is all one piece. And you draw a grid. and then you applique these melons. So the hard part is sewing the melons, not hard. And then these lovely little curvy diamonds, they're not hard. And so it all just gets appliqued onto the one fabric. So you're not dealing with a whole bunch of fabrics and curved seams and squaring it all up. So really easy. So if you look at appliqued pickle dish patterns, I think you might find it. If you have trouble finding it, please send me a note and I'll see what I can do to locate it. But I made this many, many years ago. But again, the spiky points are a wedge, and that's what gives it the energy. It explodes. So there's that. This is a foundation pieced table topper. I might have brought this in before, and it is hard. You know, hard isn't the right word. It just takes time. It's meticulous. You have to really think when you're making it. It's paper pieced. You have to get everything in the right place and make it. But I'm really happy with the outcome, and you're sewing straight lines. You're just using the foundation paper piecing method, which is another topic. But it's a very fun design. It's a somebody help me, Judy Niemeyer pattern. And our local rep for Judy Niemeyer, Vida Anderson, she teaches this class. She's a certified Judy Niemeyer teacher. So that's fun. The pyramid triangle, the equilateral triangle, is a wedge. This is super easy. Now, I used a template for cutting the triangles, both the solid fabric and the striped pieces, but you don't really have to. You have the right angles on your ruler. And so this is a threads, imagine that. But this is a fun and easy design. You just line them up and start sewing. And again, the movement that happens because of the angles, because it's not that predictable 45-degree right angle grid. So, wedges. Wedges are fun. I think the guild might be looking at a class on this. I don't know. So if you aren't affiliated with the Missoula Quilters Guild, you might want to think about it. It may not be your thing. But they meet actually this week, Wednesday, tomorrow, the second Wednesday of every month at, I don't know the name of it, at 6:30. At 6:30, there is a small guild called Thread runs through it. I don't know. But there's a small guild, and I think they meet at the ORI off of Russell. I'm pretty sure. I don't belong to that guild, so I don't. But Facebook has a page for them and for the Missoula Quilters Guild. And the Missoula Quilters Guild does meet the second Wednesday of every month, September through May. And
Where do they meet?
they're at the church that's over there behind the Pacific Hide and Fur, behind Costco, kind of between those two. It's a great big warehousey kind of building, but it's and they have a lovely space for us. It's really nice. I think it's on Latimer, maybe. I don't know, one of those streets. It's not far from the Latimer Fire Station. And if you get on their website, I'm sure all that's on there. Let's see. Okay, I'm just making sure I've shared what I wanted to. Okay, so let's look at the types of wedges. So we have just any triangle. This piece, a little pink and bluish one, yellow and pink and blue, is spikes that go together in blocks. So you have both the square lines and the spiky lines. Those are fun. Curved flying geese. I don't know how to do curved flying geese without paper piecing, so I know there are other methods, but I don't quite know how to do that. But I think they are amazing. They just fly, literally, I just love them. And Twister is an old pattern. I think I mentioned it last time. It's where you make a whole quilt. You sew a whole quilt in square mode. So you have squares all sewn together. And then you take this square ruler that's got a line on it that's off, like when I cut these, and you set it on that and cut that square out. You have a lot of waste. But you end up with these twisted pieces that go together. And it's fun. I was really, I jumped on board when it first came out, and I thought it was really fun to make. But then I started feeling like the waste of fabric was not quite my thing. The curved wedge is not, it doesn't have to be so hard. What you want to look for in ease is the gentleness of the curve. So the gentler your curve, the easier it is to sew. The tighter your curve, the harder it is to sew, I think. But both of these designs are, I think, pretty nice designs for that ease of sewing curves. And what you see is you have a wide edge and a narrow edge, and they come together. Now the one that spins, all the wide ends are lined up, and they come together in the center and in a narrow point, and that makes it blossom, that makes it spin. Where you have the wides and narrows alternated and still curved, you get some different things going on. Improv is just a blast. Look at wedges and improv and you will find unlimited entertainment. And this is a pillow. I just love it. If you have a chance to blow that up to take a look, it's a really cool design. I like it. The next page is foundation piecing, and there are so many options. So I've only included 3 here. The snowflake design, one of my favorites. Oh, I didn't even think of bringing the snowflake quilt. Anyway, I think I brought it before. And then the spiral log cabin is so much fun. You can do things in just making it quite scrappy, but it still spins because of the shapes. Or you can put the 4 sides of the center block and have different colors coming off of it, and then they have sort of curved blades that spin. And then this heart design is a real pretty one. If you look at it carefully, you'll see that each section that is paper pieced is the wedges that come all together at a point. The narrow ends come together. So it sort of gives the heart this expanded feeling. It's a very nice design. Like the border that I demonstrated here, this is samples of that, pictures of that. This one is just one of those in a table runner. And it moves more, I think, than just straight parallel strips. You can use your Dresden plate design or that round fanned pattern by taking out a quarter of it. Sometimes the Dresden plate is made in quarters, so it's more like the construction of a drunkard's path. And that is a real interesting, I think, corner treatment on your borders. And then the Dresden plate itself. So if you look at this tree skirt, it's just wedges, like some of the earlier pictures there. But they're sewn together in the very same manner that a Dresden plate is. And then this blue and white one is not too far off the mark of the one I brought in. It's a combination of Dresden plates and other geometric 45 degrees and parallels. And then this one on the end is a layered one. So you have a shorter blade in the center moving out to longer blades. And so you have more of a dahlia type effect. The true dahlia has a curved seam, all curved seams. And it's a whole nother world. I've never made a dahlia. Someday maybe. Okay, so the Dresden plate. Let me show you this very fun design. This is it. So it's a really, it's just a lovely little put in the center of your table, a coffee table, a dining table, whatever. You might have a little, some kind of arrangement on it, a candle or something, or not. It could be a placemat even. This is a really short blade and then a bigger circle. But as you'll see in some of the others, the blades are longer and then the circle's smaller. So that's why you have different size circles, and you may even play with different size circles yet. My template for a circle is really high tech. It's the lid of a jar. I have many different sizes that I use. And I like this arrangement of the alternating fan colors, the blade colors, and then a third fabric in the center. And then on the back, you just have one fabric. So the fabric you choose for the back, you might want to choose something that is not directional, unless that's not a terrible distraction. But if it's directional, then you're only going to see it, on one side. The blades can be done with any kind of fabric. As you see here, I used a plaid. So you can use a plaid. You can fussy cut so that the blades have, like if I were to make I don't know why I'd make a little children's one, but maybe a bedroom on top of a dresser. I might want to use these little bears that are in here, or I might want to use some other critter that's in this fabric, and fussy cut those so they're in the center of the blade. So that's another way to do it. Now, if you have a clear template like this, I don't know if you can see it, but I'll try and put my hands around it to give you the edges. This is a short blade. It's what I use for this one. And this is the one my friend Jackie gifted me. But I often make the blades longer and make the center smaller. So I just use my ruler right up against that and extend the line. When you use this, if you're going to fussy cut, you would set it down where you want it. And so, okay, let's say on my whole piece of fabric, I set it down so the bear's right smack in the middle, or so the bear's right at the bottom, or so that it's up in the tip. Either way, whatever I want. And I'd take an indelible fine tip marker and I'd kind of draw around that. And then when I set this down, I will be able to see through and get that down there. If I'm using a paper template, you can choose the general area and cut that out, or you can make your template, it makes it more flimsy, but you can make your template so that you cut the interior out and you just put a piece of saran wrap or something, tape a piece of saran wrap or whatever and draw on that. So if you don't have a plastic template, you can accommodate that in different ways. If you want a fussy cut. And I think I tried to do this. Yes, I did. I wanted to try to get the plaid centered. So all I did was simply line up here and here, this middle line with my green strip in the plaid. And so that way, and then I tried to get another green across those two corners. So it doesn't have to be perfect, but it gives you a guideline. So you can sort of fussy cut or sort of try to get things lined up a little bit to have them same, but you can also do it completely random. You have 12 blades, you could use 12 fabrics. You have 12 blades, you could divide it up differently. You could do 3 of 4, 4 of 3, 2 of 6, 6 of 2, you could do any number of things. So whatever you wanted in the display of your fabrics and the effect that it has. So that's the finished product. Move this, oh sorry, move this out of the way. Let me demonstrate. So here are some different size squares that circles that I've made for centers. And so it doesn't matter what size you use, you just need to make sure it covers the hole in the middle. The way I make my centers, like I said, is I have my fabric down, I use my template, and I use a small rotary cutter, which, here we go. A small rotary cutter only because as you're going in a curve, your small rotary cutter won't be jerking around that as much. And I just cut around. And then I cut the same size of stitch witchery or the thin webbing or fusible interfacing works. But if you use fusible interfacing, one side is fusible. So you want to think of the, I have to get this right now. Let's see. You want to think of the fusible side as the right side. So you put the fusible side next to the fusible side of your, let me say that all over again. You put the fusible side of your interfacing, and in stitch witchery it's both, so it doesn't matter. And then next to the right side of your fabric, and then you sew around a 1/4 inch around the outside edge. Then you take your scissors and you snip right in the middle, snip a hole, and then you can turn it inside out. And you use a turning tool. Now I have this absolutely lovely tool that has a pointed end on one end and a rounded but flat chisel end on the other. And these are lovely. And then I just reach in right here in this tear and I just kind of push around to get that outside edge nice and smooth. Do not iron yet. Because you have fusible, unless you have the Teflon sheets. And if you have the Teflon sheet, if you've not seen them, they're just about 18 inches square, so 16 inches square. And you can iron on them and then peel it right off and it still will stick. However, word of caution, what I do is my sewing room has a linoleum cement basement floor. And when I first use my, say this is a Teflon sheet and I'm ironing and getting that edge nice and smooth, I pick up the Teflon sheet and I set it down on the linoleum floor to cool it. Then it peels off quite nicely. But when you try to peel it off the Teflon and it's still warm, sometimes it leaves behind some residue. So if you use the Teflon sheet in order to press that nice little edge first, you don't have to do that, but if you like doing that, that's a little tip from me. So you sew around the outside, snip the interfacing or fusible, turn it inside out, smooth out the seam, and set it aside. Then you take your template that I'm not seeing because it's clear, sitting here somewhere. Anyway, we'll use this one. You set your template down on your fabric, and you may want to go for efficiency, you may want to set it down this way and then go this way and this way to cut your fabric if you don't need to line up any designs. You'll want to know how many of these you're going to make in each fabric and cut that number. Again, I've used 2 fabrics, and so I have, the first thing I do is I sew them in pairs. So you sew this to the skinny to the wide corner, you sew all the pairs, okay? Then you sew the pairs of pairs, and it will hopefully happen automatically. When you sew the pairs, you always want to sew the same structure. So it doesn't matter which way you do it, but you just want to be consistent. So I usually go, I usually go from the skinny edge because it's nice and blunt and lined up, so it doesn't get boggled up in your needle and presser foot. So I start there and I go out to the angled edge, and I have either the dark on top always and the light on the bottom, or the other way around, but do it consistently. So if you are doing an alternating design, then when you sew your pairs together, you always want them to be lined up the same way. Does that make sense? Okay. So I have these, I have these. Now I'm going to take pairs of pairs and I'm going to sew those together. So then I will have these 2 and sew those, and these 2 and sew those, and these 2 and sew those. So I'll have 3 sets. Now I'm going to sew those 3 pieces all together and get a full round. Then I go to my iron. Now because these aren't all sewn together yet, they make a bigger circle than they should, but let's just say they come together like that-ish. Okay, so now I have this, and then I've cut out my circle. I've decided a big one. I don't know why, but I did. So I made a big one. I have a snip in the back that I turned it inside out. I used my tool to smooth out the edge, and now I have it that is gonna go here, but not yet. This is the last thing that happens. So now, when I get all the pieces together, I will have this one out of the way. I will have this. So this is where I am here. Now I go to my iron and I press open all these seams. So press those open. Then it lays nice and flat. If you press only to one side, like to the dark, that's okay too, but it tends to have bumpy edges that, and depending on the fabrics and all that, it might be a little more noticeable. But I like the open seams. That is, so yes, I do use an iron with this. Then I set this down on a rough-sized piece of batting so that I can get the full shape after it's pressed. So you want to have it all pressed, all ready to rock and roll. This is a little skimpy. I didn't do the best job in getting that ready for today, but you know, you can pull and tug. Don't pull and tug too much, because when you wash it, it will in fact try to go back. So you'll have a little trouble. Okay, then you have that. Then you choose your fabric that you're gonna have for your back. And again, directionality is probably important to pay attention to. And you lay that down. Now I've set this down wrong side, but it doesn't need to be. I'm not doing that with any intent. And then I take my scissors and I just cut out this rough, you can curve it around, you can do whatever you want. A rough piece here. So there's that. So now, I'm going to put right sides together in fabric. Make sure everything's fit so I don't get a selvage weird tip. And again, this would be pressed. Whoops, slipped. Gotta get right up here. Okay, you want to check all your points. Make sure you're in enough in the design of the fabric for selvages and for you're not falling off the edge of the cut. Then you set this down on top of the batting, and depending on how much room you've given yourself, you may need to cut a bigger piece of batting than this. I think I should have. I should have. But you know, if you don't know, you can take a snip of the same kind of batting, zigzag a nice big open piece. In fact, I have a piece done here, and just add it on where you're running short. So if you get stuck, that you can do that. Okay? So then you bring this to your machine, and using your 1/4-inch foot, you sew and start anywhere and sew straight, then leave your needle in, pivot, come up to the seam, pivot, come down to the point, pivot, come to the seam. Now I did give you a note that those of you who have been in garment making or made things like dolls or things that have that turn it out outside out with little points. If you do a corner by, we need a whiteboard in here. If you do a corner by, okay, I'll just point it out here, and I'll just make it more dramatic than it actually is. But you sew your 1/4-inch seam, stitch, 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 and if your foot has a mark that says this is where you pivot, to turn, like for a binding or something like that, you go shy of that. You don't go all the way. Then you pivot so that you make an angle in between those two. And you take 1 or 2 stitches, depending how big your stitching is, and then pivot again and follow that line. So you have here, stitch, maybe stitch, stitch, and then here. So you're kind of chopping off that super tight point. That is, it's totally like contrary to what you would think, but what happens is it gives room for the fabric to fold in and get out of the way. When you just go stitch point, stitch point, stitch point, your fabric in those corners gets bulky, and it makes it hard to get a nice clean point. So when you do just 1 or even 2 stitches and then turn it inside out, the fabric just moves out of the way and you get this really nice tip. Now the same is true, but for a different reason. When you come back into these, you'll be sewing and your seam is pressed open. So we'll do a little here with my thumbnail. Okay, so you have an open seam. So you do stitch, stitch on the point, come back up, and then just before the seam, the change of fabric, you leave your needle in, and then you come perpendicular to that seam and you take 1 or 2 stitches over the seam. So then, and then when you go back to trim everything, you actually take your scissors and snip the stitches in that seam right up to your stitch Does that make sense? Okay. And then when you turn that inside out, the seams and the extra fabric get out of the way. So you have a nice, clean edge to work with. So that's a little garment making tip. I'm going to pass this around so you can see I have stitched this one in the way that I told you, and then trimmed. So then after you've sewn all the way around, then you go back and you trim. Now, I leave the straight run 1/4 inch. I don't cut it any narrower than that. But around these tips, I trim it off pretty close. And into here, I just go like that and snip. And go right here and snip. Don't cross your sewing line. So I'm gonna pass that around so you can see what those, so on both the outside points and the inside points, you just take that 1 or 2 stitches. Okay, then I'll demonstrate that in just a sec, but then you have this one side that still has the open hole in the middle. So now you can turn everything inside out. So then when you turn everything inside out, you take your little turning tool and give a little easy jab, point, point, gentle but firm, so that you're getting a nice clean point, but also not so that you're pushing, you're fraying your fabric, because I do trim pretty close. You don't have to, but I like to.
I'll show the camera after you.
Yeah, yeah. You want me to hold it up, or you got it?
I got it.
Okay.
We're real close.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So I left, I think, 2 blades unsewn. Yes. Okay. So here we go. I have this new Janome that I just got. I love it, love it, love it. But I'm getting used to some of the specialized tools different from my old machine. And, oops, and I have to set it the right thing or it won't be in the right place. Okay. So we go up here, and I'm almost to the seam. I'm not on it. I turn this way. I go 1, and that worked out fine. And then come down here. And I have a mark on my foot that tells me when I'm getting to the 1/4 inch from. And so I'm almost there. Let me just use this. So here's my mark, and here's the edge of the fabric. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn to take the difference, and I'm going to take 2. Maybe should have done a little further. I don't know. I did 2 because I wanted that to cross the seam, and it didn't.
Your machine sounds great.
Doesn't it?
I know.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just got to see that, but it doesn't sound that.
Oh, it is so. They are. You know, I'm glad you. Well, even the more modern ones, I have never. I've sewn with friends who have Berninas, and I'm always. I've talked a lot about the sensory component to sewing and quilting and how important it is to me, and it's really important. I didn't realize, in fact, until I got this machine, how I pay attention to the hum or the buzz or the rattle or the whatever. And it's not necessarily that it's gonna be bad if it rattles, but it's gotta be a rattle that I like. It's like listening to the wrong song or something. Okay, now I have to remember. Needle up.
Pay attention until I come and, you know, and hear something like this. It's like spinning wheels. Some people like a spinning wheel that's just quiet. I love a spinning wheel that talks.
I do too. I do too. Okay, so now I'm going to go through here and I'm going to trim this a little. I notice I kind of trimmed those others pretty tight. I don't know. Okay, and then I'm going to snip. And snip. I don't use pins as a rule, but this is one thing that when we're at this stage and getting ready to go around, I do pin way inside, but I just pin each blade just to hold everything in place, because as you're moving a circular object, it does push, and that way you don't end up with no other, two sides not being ready for each other. Okay, here's my hole in the middle. I'm going to reach up into the point, and I'm going to push it out, reach up into the point, push them out. Hopefully my center circle is big enough that I don't have to worry about some of the seams popping open. So right here, I'm not doing like a super tight job of getting those points out. I'm just getting them where they'll do their thing. When it's at this stage, it kind of looks funny. Okay, I think I might just pull it all out here. This is a little hole to work with. Sometimes I make a bigger hole, sometimes smaller. Okay, so I'm going to take my point. I'm going to come into this firmly, but carefully, gently. And then here, I'll do it from here. I'm just kind of teasing that edge to come out. The other thing you can do if you get into a bulky spot is take a pin and parallel to your seam, kind of dig in a little, not all the way through, but just sort of get your fingers around the pin and kind of pull. Just 1 or 2 threads, but again, you don't want to pull hard, because if you're only holding on to 1 or 2 threads, you're going to pull them right out. It's a very delicate operation. Delicate operation. Okay, so then you have that. Then when you get to these inside ones, you kind of pull them, and you might feel a little pop. And that's okay. You don't want a lot of it, but you want it to come down. Then you go to your iron after you get all of them open and press it all down. And at that point, where did my circle for this one go? I don't know where it went. On the floor. Then you get to here. And so then you take your circle and you set it down. And what I do to get my circle right is I finger press a plus across here, and then matching that finger press across here, I open it up. So I don't know if you can see, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4. You could chalk line it, you could do whatever. And because this is a 12, it's not an odd number, I should line up like on the seams with that. So if they're all lined up, it should work. Because see, if you have it off, then these two don't line up. So if you have all 4 of them lining up, you should be pretty centered. And then, just to be sure, I will go to maybe a different spot and just measure. I'm at 4 inches. I'm at kind of 4 inches, close enough. Okay, that's good. And then there you are. Then you go to your iron and you press, and your fusible will hold that right down. Then you go to your machine and you do your decorative top stitching or just plain top stitching. So as I did on this one, I don't know why I did what I did actually. I looked at that and went, well, you can tell I haven't made these in a long time. But what I did was on this side, I took my decorative stitching, I started here and I went down to the point and came back. And then I went down the seam and came back to the middle. I don't know. I mean, it's okay, but it's kind of weird. But anyway, so I did that. But you can do a variety of other possibilities, of course. And then I don't know if any of you have experience with using this. Ooh, maybe I don't have it with me. There's a bar that you can hook onto your foot, and it's just a bar that has a curve on it.
Right.
And that curve, and you can move it in and out, and you can use it to measure. So the bar goes along here and your foot is sewing here, and so the bar guides you to stay at the same distance. Or you can draw with a chalk mark or something like that, a smaller circle, or you can just do it right around the outside edge of the fabric, or you can do a crisscross coming around all of it. So there's a number of things you can do in playing with your decorative stitches, but this one, I want you to look. What I've done is I've come along the outside, and then I've come along the seam, come over and along the other side of the seam, down, over, up one side of the seam, down the other. And so just a straight stitch, but making that work. And then on the center, I just go around the circle. So pass that around. On the back, you can really see more what it looks like. And that's the top stitching. So it's a super easy process. I think they turn out really just delightful, especially if you get to use some of your fun fabrics that you only need this much of it. I mean, a fat quarter is certainly enough, more than enough, I think.
This would make a nice placemat.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
Lots of them to do.
Yeah, and you can make them smaller and you can make them bigger. There are also some ways to make them oval, but I won't go there. So that is wedges and Dresden plates. My gosh, I actually got it all done. And happy sewing, happy quilting. So really at this point, you guys are able to, I mean, this takes an evening. It just isn't a big time consuming thing. If you make a bunch of them, as I did for the class to have them ready, and I just went to it and cut out a bunch of petals and made sure I had enough for each design, and then went for it. And I love this. This was like the last one I did. I'm going, oh, I need another step to show you. And so I did this one last, and it's my fave. I just love the Aunt Gracie's retro fabrics. It's kind of fun. So any questions? Oh, I do have one last thing, sorry. How to put one of these on a quilt. So let's say you are making a Dresden plate, not this big, or maybe this big, and you put it in a block. So you have a piece of fabric that's bigger than this. You can just as we made the top only, you can take this, put your center on, or wait and put your center on after it's on, applique on, and raw edge or turned under. You can top stitch it right onto the fabric. You can hand stitch it right onto the fabric. Also, if you cut your blade, let's see, if you cut your blade with a straight edge, and then this is the right side of your fabric, you fold this together and you sew a 1/4 inch seam. When you turn that inside out, it gives you a pointed one. So that's another way to do it. And then also it's turned under automatically. So that's another nice way to do that. If you want a curved edge, a scalloped edge, one way to do the circle and to do the scallop edge is to cut out the same shape in freezer paper. You put the shiny side down toward the wrong side of your fabric. So here, so let's say I have this whole shape. However, I want this to be a 1/4 inch less. So I want it to be a little smaller and what I want it to look like on. And so I cut this that little bit smaller. And then this, when I press it, will stick. It's a waxy surface. It can come out. And let's say that's nice and straight. That gives me a firm edge to press the edge under. Also a firm edge to do your circle. And so you can use this for either of those. If you want to sew it in, like I did on Jackie's quilt, the blue and white one, you have a straight, they're all trimmed off in a circle, so you have a smooth circle, and then they're sewn onto that same curve like a drunkard's path. Or top stitched, either way. I can't remember what I did on that. I think I top stitched. No, I sewed it in. So this one's sewn in on a curve, I think. Yes, and top stitch too, both. Now I think that's it. Great. Yeah, thank you. I hope you get home and decide to make one of these right away, so that right away it's in your blood to go, oh yeah, that's really easy. This is one of the sweetest, fastest little, I don't know, kind of a hostess gift, or a, if you have, like, we do at our house on the holidays, we have a lot of people who just sort of end up at our house, and it's nice to just have a few things made ahead of time like this that you can go, oh, here's a gift for you too,
That's why you have so many people coming to your house at Christmas.
And so that pot holders are another great winner. Everybody needs pot holders. Okay, so happy sewing.
That was great.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Suzanne.
You are welcome, my pleasure.